Welcome to the second lecture on contracts and incentives. I ended the last lecture talking about corporate social responsibility, CSR. I wanted to pick up one last thread on that and move forward with the idea of what kind of incentives a firm will likely use and what the advantages and disadvantages are of those kinds of incentives, especially incentives tied to performance measures. So as far as CSR goes, the last thing I think I wanted to add to what I said last time, so let me reiterate very quickly what I said. I said we have sometimes we have two competing notions. The idea of some sort of social contract that an agent has or feels obligation towards greater society, doing something on its behalf, usually in exchange for whatever benefits or whatever benefits the agent has received from society in the past in general, or to avert some sort of societal problem in the future that's perceived. That social contract, which is not a formal contract, it's not, nobody signed it, nobody agreed to it, there are no actual parties holding, no defined and permanent parties that will hold the agent to that contract, and will decide whether or not the contract is filled, which is the downside of CSR. I mentioned it. There always can be new parties, and the terms of the contract, let me flesh out the idea I said last time. The contract can always be changed. It's like that scene from The Empire Strikes Back, the classic line where Darth Vader's come to Cloud City and he has taken over, and he made a certain arrangement, if you will, with the Lando Calrissian who runs Cloud City to capture the good guys, the protagonists, and then he has all the power, though. Darth Vader has all the power in this scene, and he says, I'm doing this thing. And Lando says, wait, that wasn't our deal. And he says, I'm altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further. That's the classic nerdy line. But the point is that he has all the power. He has, in this arrangement, Darth Vader can change the deal all he wants. Well, it's very similar to what happens in CSR, in the sense that this social contract is very fuzzy and very flexible and changeable, and there are no fixed parties to it. Who knows who could show up as a stakeholder and make new claims to the company's time and profits and goods. There's no limiting principle there. So they have, on the one hand, an agent might feel some sort of obligation to social contract. On the other hand, the agent has literally made himself or herself an agent of the firm, which means signed a legally binding employment contract. And so if that person made that commitment, then it's dishonest to disregard that commitment, to break that commitment, or there's some dishonesty in trying to do what is perceived to the agent to be a good thing because it fulfills some social contract, when it contradicts the role of agent that he or she has signed up to. This role of agent is there. The employment contract is there to try to align the agent's incentives and goals with those of the principals, which are the shareholders, or the other owners if it's not a publicly held company. But the point is that the company was created as a for-profit company, or I'm assuming for-profit company. The company was created as a for-profit company with the objective of making profit, maximizing the long-term profits. And in a free society, that's a good thing, because maximizing long-term profits has to be consensual. So, if my firm has maximized long-term profits, that means that people like what my firm is doing. At the very least, it's value neutral. Perhaps people have bad judgment and they do things they shouldn't in terms of things that are bad for them. Facebook's a great example. It certainly is filling a demand in the market for this kind of electronic social media. But it has a lot of downstream negative effects on people. There are a lot of potential psychological problems with this kind of dopaminergic hit that you get from social media. So as my point is that it's at least value neutral, the idea of maximizing profit, and the agent signed on to do that. And when that employment contract, which says to do what is within your role and decision rights in that role of the firm that you've signed up for, to maximize the profit of that firm, conflicts with this social contract, which again, who knows who the parties are to it, who knows what the terms are to it. It's really never ending. There's no way you can fulfill that contract. There'll always be something more that can be done in that direction. Then we run into a significant problem. And so when we're talking about the dishonesty in the last the last lecture about dishonest reporting or consuming slack and so on and so forth, it isn't always for selfish reasons. Sometimes it's the imposition of a social contract so as to break the employment contract in the interest of the social contract. So going back to that idea of budgetary slack, I talked about budget slack and that if I have more information, therefore I know the actual cost, or the more likely cost to do something, but I can budget a higher cost, and that slack between those two can help me. I can consume it. I can consume it either by devoting less time and energy to get the same result. I meet my budget, and I was able to do it easily, and so we didn't have to buckle down and to incur significant costs, or didn't have to sacrifice other priorities in my life or my career, and or I could consume it directly and come in, work full bore, come in directly under budget, and I say directly, consume it in a different way. Consume it by using it to come in under budget, not just to meet the budget easily, but to work hard and then come in under budget, and therefore gain some respect, gain some status, gain some esteem among my colleagues and among my supervisors, and probably a bonus, some sort of bonus associated with coming in under budget, and thereby gain for myself collect some rents based on my superior knowledge of what's going on, of my area, my information asymmetry, the private knowledge that I have about the true cost of my department, my region, or whatever I know about. And there's also the factor of budget ratcheting. I'm going somewhere with this. I'm reviewing this for a reason. So budget ratcheting is the idea that the budget will be consistent, will be expected to be consistent from period to period, and that the prior period's budget is the basis for this period's budget that we're making. And so in the budgeting process, or rather in the spending process, I'm motivated to spend every single dime in my budget, even if it's on frivolous things or on things that are not up to the rate of return that the firm would like, or that would be in the interest of the principal, which is what I've signed up to do as the agent in the firm, as an employee of the firm, which is as an agent of the firm. I should be trying to maximize profit of the firm, and if there's something that's inefficient to buy, or inefficient use of time, or something that's just consumatory that benefits me and not the firm, then I shouldn't be using the budget for that thing. That goes against my employment contract at the very least. The budget ratcheting, though, says, well, because this budget that I have this period is likely to be used as the basis for next periods or future periods, then I should spend all the money in my budget, even if I don't need it, because that will allow me to set that budget at a higher level in the future period, which helps me with the idea of very similar idea of the budgetary slack. Okay, so the point of all this is, part of this is a dysfunction of the relationship, that there's a critical assumption that allows for budget ratcheting, and that is that I'm going to use this current budget for a future budget. And when this is now, I'm going to break off from what I'm not reviewing anymore. Now I'm breaking off into new idea here. So this is a dysfunctional relationship. This is at least a suboptimal relationship, I should say, because there are better ways. There are better long-term ways to this, and the idea is a long-term relationship in which there's trust and reciprocity. At least in many situations, a trust and reciprocity strategy works better. It's superior. It's win, 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 or all the way around. How many wins you want to put into the silly sentence. It can work better for everyone to cooperate when we have this shared goals, shared nexus of goals. We're all agents of the firm. We should cooperate and try to do the best we can. And that means honestly sharing as much private information as is necessary, and that means not punishing those downstream of you. So there's trust and reciprocity. So the person who is not ratcheting is trusting, and I'm spending my trust. I'm not gonna spend this extra money because I'm trusting that if I really do need I do need to budget more money next period. You'll let me budget more money next period, and you're going to be reciprocal. So trust and reciprocity. You're going to be reciprocal and trust me back and say, okay, yes, I don't spend all the money that is in your budget, because if you really need more money next period, I'm not going to hold this period's low costs against you. I'm not going to hold good behavior, good cost efficiency this period against you when I form next period's budget. So this idea of a long-term relationship can help reduce the incentive for slack and for ratcheting. Also, there's literally citizenship types of behaviors that start to arise when one identifies more with the firm, when one feels a longer-term relationship with those in the firm and is more aligned psychologically with the mission. One tends to go out of his or her way to do things that are personally costly but that benefit the firm. And so this goes in. Let's start talking about what this means for the contract. So there are there's a continuum of completeness of the contract. This idea of how complete is the contract is sometimes a question we ask in economics academia, at least in the incentive area. So there's no literally complete contract. That's impossible to reach, because the idea of a complete contract would be one that covers every possible contingency. Oh, well, if Susie comes in the door 5 minutes late, then your contract is that you do X, Y, and Z and don't do A, B, and C. There's no contract in the world that's going to cover the contingency that Susie comes in late. They're going to be much more general than that. And there's a lot more wiggle room in most contracts. And so it's a question of how incomplete the contracting is. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe one could think of an example in which one can do nearly complete contracting, but usually that's a very small engagement, and one is not an employee of the firm. One is a contractor. We have very specific requirements that need to be met. You're coming in just for those requirements, and we have very specific criteria for your work product. Sure, that's a much more complete contract than with an employee who is on a continuing basis expected to simply embody the profit mission of the firm and work towards that end, have his or her interests aligned continually towards that profit-making end. And so usually with employees, the idea is an incomplete contract. It's going to be based on some sort of ongoing long-term relationship, and therefore that's a distinction between an employee and a contractor. And largely we're talking about a legal distinction, but there's something substantial underneath that legal distinction. And so when you have more incomplete contract, which says, okay, we want you to just you're employed and you're supposed to do this general thing, and we'll incentivize you in very general ways. You have more flexibility. There's more trust being given to you, and the idea is that you're going to be reciprocal in that trust. And often what we find is this interesting idea in economics. They have this finding of what's called gift wages. With the idea of gift wages, the employer is going to this is both observed in actual contracts, actual employment contracts, and in experimental areas as well. They find we put people in a lab and do some experiment where they kind of induce a situation of gift wages. They find the kind of behavior that you would expect. But the idea is that the employer is going to pay you more than you really are worth. The employer pads in your salary a little bit, pads some extra gift wages in as an initial offering of trust. The idea being, well, okay, look, I'm not going to do complete contracting with you. I'm going to leave it to you to be an agent and freely work towards the profit mission of the firm. But in order to do that, I'm going to induce reciprocity from you. So you're doing that of your own free will and choice, and you're not taking advantage of every piece of information asymmetry that you have to at the expense of the firm. To benefit yourself at the expense of the firm, I'm going to give you some initial trust up front and say, and it doesn't be up front in terms of a signing bonus, but sometimes it is. But more we're talking about the idea of, really the market price for my labor would be $15 an hour, but they're going to pay me $16, $17, $18 an hour because they want to show that this relationship is valuable. They want to communicate to me that we're investing in you, and we want you to invest in us. We want a reciprocal relationship. We're gonna scratch each other's backs in a way that is trusting and reciprocal. We don't want to treat you poorly as an employee. We want to treat you well. We hope you want to treat us as an employer well as well. And so what they find in the experiments when they run this is that the gift wages are quite effective. They really do induce some trust and reciprocity. And they communicate trust and they induce some reciprocity. So we have this a question of how complete is the contract, and how so in terms of a complete contract has a lot of criteria. It's typically a longer contract, longer employment contract, and very specific as to what you're supposed to do, and covers as many contingencies as possible. And a more incomplete contract is much more open-ended and much more usually accompanied with some level of gift waging, or often with gift wages. At least that's one tool when you have a more incomplete contract. Sometimes the gift wage is not financial. Sometimes the gift wage is simply the joy of freedom, the opportunity to work with less oversight, the opportunity to work with more flexibility as far as your schedule is concerned, or as far as how your work product is delivered, that kind of idea. So, this kind of goes. There's some parallels, at least, to the old patronage system in the arts. The classical composers, for example, usually or often would find a patron, some person who was wealthy, who wanted a composer on staff, wanted to support the composer's work, and did not want to expose the composer directly to the market forces, and wanted this composer to create artistic works, and so would pay and the composer would become a patron of this person. He would give this person a stipend and a living wage, and provide housing or whatever would be necessary for this composer and his or her family. And as a result of that, this composer has a lot of freedom. That's different from when in classical music you would have a commissioned piece. So sometimes either the patron or somebody else who was wealthy would say, look, I'll pay you a certain amount for this particular type of piece. And you see a difference in some of those. You can I can even look to. I don't know if any of you are interested in classical music, but you have Beethoven, who wrote 9 symphonies, and I recall one of them was at least a semi-commissioned piece. I don't know how many strictures were put on it. I don't recall the history of this, but the 4th symphony was indeed was a commissioned piece. Was for somebody, I believe, who Beethoven had a relationship with. I may have not his primary patron. Sometimes the composers had a system of patrons, or people that a number of people in wealthy society who would support them. But the point is that I actually like the 4th symphony quite a bit, but it is different in tenor from those that where Beethoven was reaching more towards an emotional center that he was trying to express. The 3rd and the 5th surrounding the 4th. So the 3rd he wrote before the 3rd, which he wrote before the 4th, and the 5th, which he wrote after the 4th, are much more drawn from his inner expression of what he wanted to do with the music. Whereas with the 4th, it seems he used some ideas from the 5th, especially, that he was writing at the same time, maybe some ideas copied over from the 3rd as well, that he said, okay, well, I need to create a piece, it's a little more close to the contract, I'm commissioned to create a symphony. It wasn't born of myself, it didn't come out of myself, that I wanted to write a symphony to express this emotion, or this idea, or this musical novelty, or whatever that is in my head. Instead, I've commissioned to this, and so I'm going to put the pieces together in a different way. So we have the difference between, kind of getting far afield, but we can think of examples in our lives where the benefits of incomplete contracting include flexibility, and include the idea of being able to do something that is more personally meaningful, or in a way that's more personally beneficial. In fact, that is indeed one of the benefits of a career in academia. We tend to have more flexibility with what we do, because the university, at least traditionally, universities saw us as kind of knowledge workers in a similar way. They would be the patron of these people who had some sort of accumulated intellectual knowledge of an area, and they wanted us to research in that area and build out and increase the knowledge in that area, and thereby making us well equipped to be people who would teach that area very deeply to people interested in that area of knowledge as well. And so that said, we have a lot of flexibility. If you're at a very, very research strong institution, you might be expected to teach 1 class a year on the extreme, and the rest of your time you're expected just generally to be producing research. But that doesn't, the time scale of that, of when you receive some sort of performance evaluation of that, when your performance is measured, the time scale of that tends to be in the years, in terms of years. So when you get hired, you typically have, at least in accounting, you have 5 years, and then on your 6th year you go up for tenure, as it were. You go up and you say, okay, well, here's my work product from these first 5 years, and it's going to show what I can do in the future. It's kind of a probationary period while you're not tenured, and then in the 6th year you go up and they evaluate whether or not you have sufficiently used your free time that they've given you, your flexible time, I should say, that they've given you. They've expected you to work a lot of hours, really, given what they expect you to produce, but you're free to arrange it how you like. And I enjoy that, and that's one of the reasons why I try to set up my classes as much as I can, so that you have flexibility as to how you set up your time. I try not to get too into the process and inserting myself into the process of how you should be ordering your tasks as much as I can, anyway, and how you organize your time. Now, I finished that thought about academia. Yeah, we have a lot of flexibility, and at tenure we get evaluated. There are yearly evaluations, sure, but it's much more flexible and much more incomplete, I should say. It's not as if we're expected to have after 1 year you have 20% of the 5 years worth of work you're supposed to have at the time you go up for tenure. Second year you have 40%. It's not nearly like that. There's a general evaluation of whether you're moving along, but you really don't have a hard and fast deadline at many schools anyway until you go up for tenure, and then they evaluate whether your work product is worthy of being tenured in thereafter. And then they're making a huge investment in you with giving you even more flexibility by giving you these at least theoretically additional protections of tenure. It tends to hold up at various levels depending on what the administration wants to do, but theoretically at least it's additional protection of your job. The idea that we found your work to be convincing pre-tenure, so we're going to make a huge investment of you and give you these protections in perpetuity for your career in terms of not being able to be fired, so you can continue doing your knowledge work. So the idea there is that's huge as a huge gift wage. That the idea of investiture of tenure on a professor is a huge gift wage to that professor, and the expectation is that trust will be reciprocated, and there's no contract saying that, or the contract is very limited in saying that. Sometimes professors do. They get tenure and then they say, well, great, more vacation time. That's very possible. And on the other hand, some professors get tenure and they say, great, now I can do even more of my work that I was doing pre-tenure, and I can even go further and further. I'm more skilled now, and I know more even, and I can just continue where I left off. And the university is trying to motivate that. So we have when we talk about performance measures, we have to understand that they're in this environment of a continuum between completely incomplete, of fully incomplete contracting and fully complete contracting. Yeah, if you had a video on me right now, I have my left hand out on one end of the continuum for fully incomplete contracting, and my right hand out on the continuum for fully complete contracting, and everything really is in between those two endpoints. People aren't just giving money away for free with no performance measures, and generally speaking anyway, and people aren't covering every contingency in terms of complete contracting. And so our performance measures, how do we use our performance measures? And so now I want to talk about the idea of subjectivity and objectivity and financial and non-financial performance measures. So incentives generally align with like I mentioned in the last lecture, and maybe you could divide it up differently, but I'm focused on 3 different categories. The idea of equity ownership, so some sort of shareholder in terms of stock options. Second, inside debt, some sort of pension or deferred compensation. Not a 401k, not talking about a defined contribution plan. That money is yours. It's in the 401k. The company has just paid you extra, but it's paid you extra for your retirement, with the idea being that will differentially motivate those who are interested in the long term, and therefore will have a long-term relationship. So the idea of a company investing in your 401k or trying to get a higher match in 401k is the idea they want people who are longer term. They want you to develop a relationship with you, so there's less friction in terms of information asymmetry. They want your interests aligned with the firm's, and that will benefit both of you more. So they're giving you an upfront investment in terms of we're going to match more, we're going to give this money for retirement because if you like that, you're likely to be somebody who will play ball on our long-term relationship game here. Okay, anyway, that's the second category is inside debt, which again does not include defined contribution plans for retirement. It's pensions specifically, which are defined benefit plans, because those once you retire, those are set to pay you from the company's money in perpetuity until either you or the company dies. And usually, sometimes there's some of those. Maybe there's a provision for a spouse, but beyond that, really, the idea is that you're motivated to ensure as much as possible the long-term the long-term solvency of the firm, so it can continue to pay out its debts to you, inside debt. And the third area is incentives based on performance measures. And so here we have the idea. Here we have the traditional bonus if your department has a certain level of profits. And this is why this is an accounting. This is the primary reason why it's an accounting area, at least in my particular domain and what I deal with, my research areas. So this is where I tend to be most interested in it, because maybe this sounds more psychological and more pure economics, but think about that sentence for a second. That third category is incentives based on performance measures. So those performance measures, the example I gave was you get a bonus if your department has certain levels of profit. Okay, profit is an accounting derivation. Accounting determines what the profit is, and so all these ideas that we have in managerial accounting and in financial accounting, as to how to deliver information about how the firm is actually doing, they now become a tool in terms of, am I going to get my bonus? They get a tool in terms of aligning the motivations of agents to the principal. And the question is, how well does it do that? And there are a number, this is a huge area of research, so I'm not going to be able to cover all of it right now, and you wouldn't want me to. But let's talk about a few different characteristics of these kind of performance measures. So one axis you could split performance measures onto, or a continuum as well. One axis you could define them on is how subjective versus how objective they are. Now, financial performance measures tend to be relatively objective. Those two do go together, but they're not synonymous. So they do tend to have objective definitions based on accounting rules. There might be some leeways, occasional times that you can subjectively change the rules, or have some. You get into some earning management territory. Well, what is an accrual that we've incurred? You get into some of those areas in terms of, well, how can we subjectively interpret financial returns? But the point is that's actually a different dimension. So right now we're talking about objectivity versus subjectivity. So there are some advantages to having a purely objective or purely subjective performance measure, and some disadvantages to that. So objectivity means that it is clearly defined, and not based on anyone's judgment. It could be a robot could decide, more or less. A robot not knowing anything about the situation could simply decide. The computer could just spit out the number. That's an objective performance measure. Whereas or as much as possible, it's like I said, I mentioned the idea of a continuum. There are more objective performance measures. Perhaps there is some interpretation needed, and if you've ever done close for a company, sometimes there's a question. Sometimes there are questionable entries. Well, was this put in the wrong cost center? I don't know. Got to make a judgment call. So I'm not saying there's no judgment, but there's limited judgment when you have more objective performance measures, and whether that's relevant, because whether that entry was put in the wrong cost center will affect the ultimate costs in that cost center within the firm. So there's a person attached to that cost center who, if that person's contract is that they get bonuses or pay or time off, whatever, tchotchkes of some sort, anything based on the performance, then yeah, that is relevant. So there might be some judgment even in objective performance measures. But then when I'm really talking about subjective performance measures, we're talking about things that are entirely based or primarily based on someone's judgment. So this is when we get into the idea of a performance evaluation. So there are two parts of that. You go in with your supervisor typically, and often the supervisor has something objective in front of him or her, a printout of your work from various metrics that the company is using. But then on top of that, layering on top of that, the supervisor usually says, I've seen this in you. So I've observed this outside, above and beyond the metrics. I've observed these subjective performance measures. This subjective performance from you. I make a judgment about it, and my belief is such and such, and my evaluation of you is such and such. And so there's a degree to which you can be more or less subjective, and some contracts push hard into the objective territory. bonuses and such are tied to the financial measures, period. And really, your supervisor might call you in for a performance evaluation, but it tends to just be to go over the numbers. And there's very little that the supervisor adds in terms of judging your performance. On the other hand, sometimes the contract is relatively vague and really wants the supervisor to have discretion to decide whether or not you get the bonus. There are some I want to point out some obvious or non-obvious drawbacks to more subjectivity. Let's start with that. We talk about the comparison between these two. So with subjectivity, you have this tendency on both parts to manage the human relationship. So that means leniency, it means centrality, and it means currying favor, ingratiation. So 1, 2, 3. And really the first and the third are the ones I want to focus on. The centrality one, it's less important, honestly. But the idea is that people tend not to evaluate people in the extremes, either extremely good or extremely poorly. They tend to group people closer together than when they're subjectively judging, than when there are objective measures. People distribute further apart on the objective metrics, whereas an individual will tend to evaluate more centrally. But that's really not critical to the issue here. More to the issue is the idea of leniency on the part of the supervisor and ingratiation on the part of the subordinate. And so, as a supervisor, your life is easier when things are happy at the office. When people who are your subordinates, who you're overseeing, you're supervising, like you or want to cooperate with you. And so there is a tendency, when we have subjective performance measures, not to be as harsh as the objective performance might actually warrant. There are some office politics involved with this. I don't really want to rock the boat. I don't really want to come down hard on such and such person. And some of this varies by personality type, but there are ramifications, at least, if I give a bad performance evaluation to a subordinate. There are ramifications for him or her, ramifications for me as well on down the road. Whereas the computer doesn't care if it gives you a profit number. It spits out a profit number that is well below what it should be. So it doesn't care about your feelings. Whereas I at least have some incentive to be worried about how our relationship is ongoing in the future, because I'm gonna want it within my grasp to be motivating you for future effort. And at least some people take that to mean, well, I've got to soften the blow. I've got to be lenient to this person. I've got to try to look for the positive so that we can move forward out of this or whatever. And some of that's good. Some of that's very good. The idea of oh, you know what, this was a really bad month for this person, but I should focus on what that person did well so that I can get more of that in the future. As long as I'm being honest still about how bad of a month it was and the things that did not go right. All right, so leniency, and also assuming there's a relatively tight relationship, a relatively close bond between the supervisor and subordinate, the supervisor may be more amenable, still on the leniency category of subjective performance evaluation, might be more amenable to explanations that are external to the subordinate. So when they meet and the supervisor identifies closely with the subordinate and says, hey, we're on the same team. I like you, you like me. We go to the cookouts and so on and so forth. We're part of this company culture. When that happens, then some of the self-serving bias of externality comes into play. So there's a self-serving bias about attribution. So when I do well, I credit myself. When I do poorly, I tend to look for external reasons for why I did poorly. This is my personal. This is me. And this is true of most everybody. It's very hard to break. It's a natural tendency. It's hard to break that and get out of that. And so if I also do that for people that I associate closely with and people that I see as on my team and my in-group. And so if I have a close group that I'm working with and we identify as a group together very, very strongly, then I'm likely to extend that attribution bias to them as well. And say, if they did well, I think to myself, good, you did well, we as a group did well, hooray, hurrah, let's burn some mattresses because our team won. Sorry, people do funny things when their football team wins, and they had nothing to do with it, but they identify with the team, and so therefore they're happy. But when person on your team, on your group does well, so when I say when their football team, when lots of riots happen, strangely enough, from people who had nothing to do with the football outcome. But on the other hand, if the team does poorly, often we don't. Assuming I still feel strongly that I'm associated with this team or this group is doing well. I will likely look for, if possible, some external attribution. Oh, well, in this analogy I'm making with sports, the refs were against us. Oh, well, that other team cheated. That other team did something that they shouldn't have. Or, I try to find some other reason that we lost other than we did poorly. In the employment setting, so getting off the football analogy, in the employment setting, if my team does poorly or a team member does poorly, I'm going to want to say, well, you know what, this was just a bad month in general, the bad environment. Oh, you had a tough, your region is very tough. I don't blame you. And it might be true. It might be true. But the point is that I'm going to favor those interpretations, assuming I see you as part of my in-group. And so part of that's personality differs by level of agreeableness. How agreeable are you? But for the average agreeableness person, the more in-group I see you as, the more as a supervisor I'm evaluating you subjectively, and I see you as an ally in the mission of the firm, or whatever my incentives are as well, then I'm going to want to give you leniency and find external explanations for any bad performance, and so on and so forth. So that's how I operate, and then you react to that by seeking to ingratiate yourself to me. So let's say I have a pet project, and it's a garbage project. It just is not going to be productive or profitable for the firm. If I'm your supervisor, then you're very likely, or you're more likely to go along with this project, not give pushback, and not give pushback, and not try to push us a different direction. If I have to subjectively measure your evaluation, or evaluate your if I have to subjectively evaluate your performance in the future. Why? Because you know it's important to me. You want me to see you as part of the team and look on you favorably, because you want that leniency. You want me to give you a good performance evaluation. So you're going to suck up to me, is what it is. We're gonna get some sycophantic behaviors where anything I say will not get challenged, even if it's a terrible idea. This is actually a really big problem. The more subjectivity in your performance measures, the more tendency we have towards inertia in the firm, where a bad idea is hard to challenge. You cannot fix something that is or it's harder to fix something that is contrary to the maximum profitability of the firm. You can have firms go very bad directions, but if it was because of some initiative from very high up, and there's a lot of subjective and performance measurement especially, then you tend to see the firm just continue down that bad path until really what happens is the objective performance becomes so bad that person gets fired or has a wake-up call. But often the firing happens first. So that's one dimension in which we talk about, was subjectivity versus objectivity. So there are upsides of subjectivity and downsides of subjectivity. Really, we can think of it as one direction. I mean, I've mainly addressed it in terms of when you get more subjective, but you can just reverse all of those weaknesses in terms of the strengths of objectivity. So in terms of objective performance measures, they don't tend to be lenient. The computer doesn't care about your feelings. They don't tend to centralize in any way the results. That's not terribly important. It doesn't really matter that much for our purposes here. And they don't really, you can't ingratiate yourself to the computer. It doesn't care. It doesn't have a real relationship with you. So you're not going to suck up to it. So those are some benefits of objectivity. Apart from that, though, there are some unique downsides to objective performance measures. So let me talk about two of them. One is that they cannot effectively accommodate externalities. So I mentioned the idea of leniency and the idea that I'm going to seek external explanations for bad performance. And those external explanations might be true. So what if it really is just a bad month? This is when the market crashed. This is when that tornado came through our region. This is so on and so forth. There are lots of external reasons the company has no control over. The agent specifically has no control over. With subjective performance measures, you as the supervisor can adjust for that and say, you know what, I know things weren't that great, but I I can adjust for the fact that a lot of that not greatness was for things outside of your control. I can more effectively give you reward based on what you actually did within your decision rights, within your control, things that were within your control. Whereas with objective performance measures, there's no opportunity to do that. If you have completely objective performance measures and there's a bad month because of some natural disaster, it's going to say nobody gets a bonus. It's going to say nobody did well. It's going to say everybody should be fired. It's going to have really bad results. There's no way to unless it's in a purely objective performance measure, there's no way to take some externality that was not conceived of beforehand and incorporate it into it. If that's in the contract, then you run the risk of things outside of your control. So that is a specific downside of objective performance measures. And so let's talk about the other dimension really quickly here. Financial versus non-financial. So there are, obviously, you're in accounting, so you know there are lots of financial measures that happen within the firm. And the most important ones are revenues and costs and the profit, which is the difference between those two. We have certain decision rights within the firm, and the idea is to associate, if you read my chapter 10, the idea is to associate those decision rights with the proper incentives. So if I run a cost center, like an accounting department, where really the only thing I don't have much direct control over revenues that are earned, but I do control the costs, then it would not make sense to try to tie my incentives, measure my performance based on some sort of revenue number. Instead, I should be measured based on some sort of cost number. Am I incurring more costs than expected? Or was I economical with my costs and incurred fewer? If I run a profit center where I have significant control over the revenues and the costs, then it would make sense to tie those together and simply measure the overall profits. One of the problems with those measures, though, is that they can only be measured in the short term and backwards looking. That is accounting. That is accounting. Accounting is short term and backwards looking. I have to, in order to perform an accounting function, I have to define a time period. And then I have to have data to fill in the time period. And that's going to I don't have data of what actually happened, of the actual entries, until after they happen. And usually it takes some time to finalize this. Earnings season for the year is not till the following spring. And so it takes some time to accumulate all the information for this defined and therefore potentially short time period. Maybe you don't think a year is very short. That's true. But if we're talking about the long-term, decades-long outlook for the company, then the results from 1 year that was already 3 months in the past before the results come out, it has limited usefulness in terms of that. So we have this downside in financial information in the sense that it can be very short-term promoting. And so if I'm manager over a profit center, I don't necessarily need to go that long making a profit. I might be able to do some cheap tricks, if you will, to maximize my profits in the short term, get my bonus, get promoted or transferred or something, in some way that benefits me, and I don't have to deal with the long-term ramifications of what I did. So maybe I, for example, have this aggressive policy that really destroys relationships with customers, but gets short-term profits for them. Maybe I am a video game company and I do a lot of microtransactions, which is just a garbage business model. I'm just gonna flat out say that. Let's say I do that. I'm harming the relationship with customers because I'm nickel and diming them and they hate it. But it's beneficial to me in the short term. I'm likely to get some at least, assuming things work out well. I might get some short-term profits, and that will give me the bonus, and maybe I can then get promoted, and then when somebody comes in next period to clean up my mess, I can just look down and say, "Oh, you're not doing it right. I got X level of profit in my department when I was there. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you getting that?" And you're the supervisor now, or if in this scenario you're the supervisor, and so are they going to say, "Yeah, I'm not doing that well because you screwed it up before I got here. It's very hard to do that. There are some political ramifications if you were to do that. Okay, so there's some short-termism if you use financial incentives, strictly speaking. So this is where the balanced scorecard and strategy maps come into play. Strategy maps are a subsection of the balanced scorecard. They're a way of arranging balanced scorecard ideas. The balanced scorecard is intended to incorporate some non-financial leading indicators. That's the idea. So when I said that accounting financial results are always in the past, that means that they're lagging. The number doesn't come out, and it lags behind. It doesn't come out until after the time has elapsed. Whereas a leading indicator, the idea is that you get that number before things are happening, or as things are happening. You can get that number much earlier in terms of the time frame. So the examples of leading indicators. The theory is, at least theoretically, if it's good training, the amount of money you're spending on training is a leading indicator. If you have a better trained workforce with higher human capital, at least theoretically you're going to have better productivity in future periods. So that the amount of money I spend on training this period is argued to be a leading indicator of future period productivity. So what the balanced scorecard does is it says, okay, well, we're going to have one financial category, and you're going to set certain goals and therefore performance measures. Once you have a goal, it judges you. It determines whether you have met those performance measures. It evaluates your performance. We're going to have certain goals in the financial category and measure performance there, like is traditional. But then we have three other categories that are non-financial, and we're going to try to get objective performance measures that will evaluate our performance in those non-financial areas that are supposed to be leading indicators for future period productivity. So the theory there is your incentives then are tied not only to what the short-term tending accounting financial numbers, but also towards these long-term tending non-financial numbers. So it's a way of trying to align the manager's incentives not just with short-term profits of the firm that might collapse as soon as the person moves to a different position or has accumulated his or her bonus, but towards long-term profitability of the firm. So the four categories are financial, and then with my hands I'm doing this. So at the top, financial. The next one down is customer. And the next one down is operations or business operations. And the next one down is learning and growth. So usually a strategy map is built to go from bottom to top of that hierarchy. So starting at the bottom, you have certain goals in learning and growth. And so you set these goals and you're trying to link them strategically. The idea is that they're going all these non-financial areas are going to link together as further and further out leading indicators of intangible or non-financial achievement that will lead to eventual financial achievement. So there's a causal chain there, cause and effect. So every foundation. So if I have these four rectangles with the four different things that I kind of built in my mind or with my hands, then every foundation is a cause, and the one above it is an effect. So at the bottom is learning and growth, and so I invest in my people. I invest in better training. I invest in their human capital. I invest in selection of better employees. I invest in opportunities for them to grow and perhaps loosening up in some ways to let them be more flexible, whatever the case may be. I have learning and growth, and really it's investing in people, the human capital within the firm. And so the idea is that that's supposed to be a cause. This is the theory of balanced scorecard anyway. That's supposed to be a cause for what comes above it, which is business operations. So because my people have higher human capital, they will be more efficient in their operations. And so I have then in that category, I'll have some goals that are supposed to be easier to achieve if I've achieved my learning and growth goals from beneath. All right, then once you have business operations, we now, the idea is if I'm more efficient with my operations, then I will have better relationship with customers. So that's the next category up, customers. So the cause, business operations, meeting those goals, at least theoretically, is supposed to lead to better customer goal achievement. And then the idea is, well, if I have better relationship with the customer and I achieve those goals, then that should lead to the financial goals being achieved. So we have this cascade of goals, and we build it from bottom to top, and I don't know why exactly, but that tends to be how these things work. I think when Bob Kaplan and David Norton were creating the balanced scorecard and strategy maps from those balanced scorecard categories, they maybe wanted to avoid the idea of a bottom line being financial. They wanted to build this idea of foundations. My underlying cause is the foundation. My underlying category is the foundation for the next category in the chain. Sometimes people put it sideways and they go from left to right, if that's easier for you. But the idea is the balanced scorecard introduced the idea of multiple categories, specifically these four that Kaplan and Norton seemed to focus on, and through their experience felt were the most beneficial to divide up the firm's short-term and long-term profitability. And the strategy map is the tying of those, usually with an arrow, tying of those categories. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, our objective is to improve new customers. Let's say we're a bank, and I want to improve new customers specifically with some sort of a product that is aimed towards younger people, not super young. Let's say this is some sort of a college loan refinance product that we're trying to sell. Okay, that's my financial objective. I have this financial objective, or increase sales of college loan refinances by 25%. That's it. That could be in a traditional financial and objective contract. That might be that might be it. That might be the only thing in the contract. I get a bonus if I reach that hurdle. Well, it's great, but that might lead me to do things to create the product in a way that gets me over that hurdle, but then doesn't really build a long-term relationship with the customers, and it's gonna evaporate soon thereafter. Well, okay. So then we're going to set a goal that should lead to that, customers. All right, well, we want to increase the name recognition of the firm within this target category. Okay, so we're going to conduct surveys. So surveys of people 25 to 35, name recognition increases by 50%. Let's say that. Okay, now we have an objective goal in the customer category. Okay, and then going further down, the cause of that, what we're going to do to help us achieve that customer goal of 50% increased name recognition is we're gonna do something different with our operations. We're going to get our name out there, and we're going to produce a web series, some sort of something funny and hip that the young people, hello fellow students, people will like. And so the idea is we're going to produce a web TV show that will attract 5 million views, let's just say, over all the series. So I put some objective measure right there. I don't know what would be good viewership of this kind of thing, or whatnot. I don't know the number I should pick, but let's just say 5 million. Okay, so now we have an objective measure for business operations. Our operations include now a branding effort of this web TV show that we're going to create. It's set in a bank, and it's about funny things that happen in the bank. Okay, and what do we have to do? We have to change who we have on the team. We're going to have to hire and build in-house probably, at least, or contract, I guess. But let's say we're going to build it in-house with our brand team, the capacity for making these web TV shows. Okay, so that's loading and growth goal. We're going to how can we make this an objective goal? We could say our performance measures are to hire more than a dozen full-time equivalent employees that meet the criteria for experience and have them on payroll now. So maybe that could be improved. Maybe I could improve that goal there. But the important thing is now we have this chain of goals. So going from the beginning of the chain, learning and growth. Okay, our goal is we have this performance measure that we're going to try to see if we meet this goal. We're going to hire a certain number of people. They're going to have certain criteria for them being hired, and we're going to try and control costs to a degree, but we need a certain amount of talent. And so we're going to hire the talent. And that's going to lead to us being able to produce this web TV series. And it's going to have a certain level of viewership because it's so interesting because of the talent we hired. And then it's so interesting because of the talent we hired. Now we're going to, you have a box with that goal of web viewership of 5 million. And then the next arrow leading up is to the next box, which says, okay, we have a goal of achieving plus 50% recognition when we do surveys of people 25 to 35. And that's going to lead to then there's another arrow that goes up to the financial goal at the top, which says we're going to increase our sales by 25% for our student loan product. Here is a simple example of what I just said. We have our financial category up here. We have our customer category right here. We have our operations category right here. We have our learning and growth category right here. And so we have a goal and some performance measure to see if we meet that goal. We have a goal, performance measure, goal, performance measure, goal, performance measure, and they're all leading to one another from bottom to top. So here we have 3 non-financial goals, and they're objective, but they're specific numerical performance measure, and leading to a financial goal. So these 3 are supposed to be leading goals that will lead to future financial performance. This is a lagging goal, which measures prior period financial performance. And so the theory of a strategy map is that these different goals are causally related, and you should test that out if you're going to build one. But they're trying to overcome the downside of purely financial goals. I think that's all I want to cover. That should give us a good taste of some of the incentive theory that we have in firms, some of the reasons why contracts are set up the way they are, some of the relationships that occur between firms and their employees, agents of the firm, and some of the struggles that occur, the trade-offs that are made, the economic reality that's going on, and part of the interplay between agent and principal in these situations. Hopefully that's been intellectually stimulating for you, and hopefully it also helps you think about your own employment or your work within the firm you're working for, you will work for, in a different way, in a more refined way that you can understand these issues as they come up and see, well, is this really what we want to do? I understand the benefits and the costs of this, so now I can make a more informed decision. That's it. Bye.